Hi there, and welcome to the course. In this short introduction, I just want to talk a bit about what we will be learning, what this course is, and who it's intended for. But if you are really itching to get started, it's okay to jump ahead to the next video, where I will show you how to install a Linux system on a virtual machine and get right to it. But otherwise, stick around, and I'm going to walk you through the course plan. Now, this course assumes no prior knowledge about Linux operating systems, or even any knowledge about what a Linux operating system is. So really, it's for total beginners. You don't have to know anything beforehand, although it would probably help if you've used a computer before. Otherwise, what I'm talking about is going to be pretty confusing. It is also for not just for developers, but anyone who wants to try an alternative operating system. If you're on Mac OS or Windows and you're tired of it for some reason, or if you just want to try something new for the novelty, then this is also a good place to start. But there will also be things in the course that I will be teaching that will be especially useful to developers and programmers. But you don't have to be a programmer or developer or have any prior knowledge about those things either for this course to be useful. But first, let's talk a little bit about what Linux actually is. Well, you might have heard of it before, but you don't really have a good grasp of what that actually means. And when people talk about Linux, they talk about a free and open source operating system. For example, Windows and Mac OS are operating systems on your computer, but Linux is something else. It's an alternative to those things. And here's the point where people will correct me and say, well, actually, Linux is not an operating system. Linux is a component of an operating system. And that is correct. Linux is actually a kernel that is basically the heart of an operating system that allows the software to talk to the hardware. But when people say Linux, they usually mean operating systems that are using the Linux kernel. Now, Linux comes in many different flavors called distributions. And a distribution is essentially a pre-packaged operating system using the Linux kernel and then some other programs to give it perhaps a graphical environment and some built-in tools such as a web browser or email client or terminal emulator. And this is what constitutes a Linux distribution. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of distributions out there. And it can be absolutely bewildering for new people who come to Linux for the first time and they don't know how to navigate this or what to choose. Because if you're coming from Windows or Mac OS, you're not used with being presented with a choice. So it's a little strange at first. But that is also what I'm going to help you with here. And we're going to start with a good basic distribution that works out of the box and is generally quite user-friendly called Ubuntu. But if you want to explore some others at a later point in time, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Now, Linux is very different from Windows and Mac OS, and even Linux distributions can vary quite a bit in how they look and feel, at least out of the box. And so jumping into a new operating system might be a little different. A lot of preconceptions about how a computer is supposed to work might no longer be applicable. And that's okay. It's a bit of an initial learning curve, but Linux, at least in my experience, is very sensibly designed and makes sense once you get into it. But then some people might be asking, if Linux has a learning curve and it's just generally different to set up, why would I have to use it instead of Windows or Mac OS? Now, I'm going to be completely honest. If you are happy with the way your computer works, then I am not going to tell you that Windows or Mac OS is the worst thing ever. Your computer is supposed to serve you, and if you think your computer in its current state does that, then I don't think you need to be compelled to change. However, there are some things I want people to know about Windows especially, and I want people to know that they have a choice if they don't like these things. Now, I think one of the biggest things that are going to put people off a bit when they hear about it is that Windows actually tracks you. There are programs and processes in the background that collect user information and browsing history and sell to third parties for advertising purposes. Now, maybe you're fine with this and you think this doesn't affect you, and that's perfectly valid, I suppose, but you should know that it does that. It also doesn't give you a lot of control over the operating system. For example, you may not be able to uninstall certain programs because the design of Windows or Mac OS, I have no experience with Mac OS personally, but they might think that this will make the system unusable or unstable, or it is just in an agreement somewhere between software distributors that you are not supposed to uninstall this software. So you can't really do that much if you really want to dig deep into what your operating system is doing. This also ties into the fact that Linux plays nicer with old hardware. If you have an old computer, a desktop, or a laptop that seems to be slowing down and you just want to use it for browsing the web or something like that, switching to Linux might be a good idea. Old laptops that are maybe 10 or 5 years old may seem like brand new if you install Linux on them. And also, you should probably switch to Linux because it's fun. At least I think so. And this ties into what I talked about before, that it is a whole new world of open source free software. If you're using Linux, that is the best way to get into using software that is completely free. And it is driven by communities, generally speaking. This means that maybe you have some tools that you're using on Windows right now that you pay a subscription fee for. There may be Linux-based alternatives that are completely free, and you never have to worry about paying a subscription again. So that is the general gist of why we should be using Linux. Now, again, I said it before and I'll say it again. If you're happy with the way your computer works, don't feel compelled to change it. I am simply offering an alternative in this course. So, in this course, we're going to go over how to install Linux on a virtual machine, meaning that you essentially install Linux on top of your existing operating system without having to change anything, because I think it would be kind of silly to ask people in the beginning of this course to commit to something entirely new and delete their old operating system installation. So, we're going to install it in a virtual machine, and I'll show you how to do that. Then I'm going to get you acquainted with Linux, how the file system works, how to handle basic administration tasks, and then we're going to go deep into the nitty-gritty with the terminal and the bash shell. For most of this course, we are going to use a text-based terminal. Now, there are Linux distributions that are designed so that you don't have to use a terminal, but I think you miss out a lot of the power and the fun of Linux if you don't touch the terminal. Then we are going to learn how to use the Vim text editor. This text editor is a little strange, but when you get used to it, it is incredibly fast and powerful and extensible. Then we are going into how you can use bash and shell scripting to automate boring tasks and to better organize your workflow so that you don't have a desktop full of 1,000 different icons and files scattered all over the place. Then we're going to go even further with multitasking with tmux. And tmux is, well, I'll explain what it is later, but it is essentially a terminal multiplexer that allows you to create different tabs and splits and windows inside of your terminal. So you're going to look like a cool hacker when you're using tmux, which is great. Then I'm going to show you some system administration, like handling users, changing passwords, updating packages on your system, and so on. The most basic things. I'm going to show you how to organize all of your configuration files, called dot files, with git and stow, which are two fantastic terminal-based command line tools for version managing files and folders. And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into specializing this workflow for developers. So if you're writing code and developing software, I'm going to show you how to use many Linux-based alternatives for the things that you might be used to, for example, VS Code or different NPM packages. So I'm going to show you how to set that up so that you can get into a proper developer workflow. And then I'm going to wrap up a little bit with a conclusion about what we've learned and how you can continue learning and going forward from here. Now, throughout all of this course, I will also have a document available, which is called How to Bash, which is a terminal I wrote on how to use, or a manual rather, on how to use the bash shell. Now, a little disclaimer before we get into this. I am not an expert on Linux. As I said in the course trailer, if you saw that, I have been doing this for about a year, and I am mostly self-taught. Now, I have tried to double-check and verify all of the information that I give in this course, but at the end of the day, I am just a student. and I'm doing this course mainly as a fun way to share my knowledge with my friends and anybody who might, well, happen upon this video. So take everything with a grain of salt, or at least the knowledge that I am not a pro. Okay? Good. But I've talked long enough. I think it's about time we get started. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to install Linux in a virtual machine. And if you have any questions or you need any help, you can write it in the comments on this video or wherever you happen to get stuck, or you can email me at my developer email, which is oxifinch@protonmail.com. Okay, I think that about does it. Let's get started, and I'll see you in the next video.